most reasonable people would accept that the United States has a right to protect its bases and its personnel. It is this government that will continue to stick up for the people across the Middle East who have suffered at the hands of Qasem Soleimani and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
So that was Boris Johnson, the Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And as world leaders are reacting to the new conflict between Iran and the United States, US aggression is already being reframed as defense measures. Before his remarks, Prime Minister Johnson began by condemning the Iranian strikes, which did not kill or injure any coalition forces. He said, quote, "Iran should not repeat these reckless and dangerous attacks, but must instead pursue urgent de-escalation." Now, for those of you that are not aware, it's important to note that Iranian attacks against the US bases were in response to the US violating international law and assassinating an Iranian general on a peace mission. According to many articles, Iran chose to miss when firing many rockets. Quote, "The judgment is that the attack on bases housing US troops in the early hours of Wednesday was demonstrative, given that the Iranian missiles used were believed to be accurate to a range of 50 meters and could have caused more serious damage if Tehran had wanted to. A warning from Iran also meant that coalition forces knew in time that the missiles were coming and that steps could be taken to avoid casualties at the Al-Assad and Erbil bases. People had enough time to take cover," a defense source said. So according to their own defense sources, Iranian missile strikes did not cause any major damages to the bases that were targeted, nor were any American lives lost during these attacks. It is clear that Iran took careful measures to ensure that this conflict was not escalated. This attack by Iran, as the article states, mainly demonstrative. It was not meant to try and escalate the conflict. Any conflict with Iran risks spilling over into neighboring countries. According to the interpreter, quote, "Amid such heightened tensions, US-Iran conflict risks spilling over into Afghanistan, which could emerge as a new war theater between the two countries if Iran chooses it as the place to further settle its score against the US. Meanwhile, the Taliban have refused to stop violence until the signing of a peace deal that includes withdrawal of US troops from the country. The US presence of 13,000 troops in Afghanistan, which borders Iran to the west, makes an obvious target for Iran-backed militants. And on the basis of the dictum, 'the enemy of my enemy is my friend,' there is a real possibility that an Iran-Taliban nexus could develop. Iran today is on far better terms with the Taliban than it was before 2002, and it could militarily support the group that has been at war with the US for the past 18 years. A week after peace talks between the US and the Taliban collapsed in September last year, Tehran hosted a Taliban delegation for discussions. The Afghan government had already accused Tehran of providing the Taliban with money, weapons, and explosives in the aim to extend its influence in western Afghanistan. President Ashraf Ghani had earlier said that Afghanistan's neutrality in the Iran-US conflict and emphasized that Afghan soil would not be used against a third country or in regional conflicts. Many of these articles fail to include what would likely happen in the aftermath of a conflict with Iran. If we take a look at the examples of Afghanistan and Iraq, in Afghanistan, the war with the Soviets, followed by a long civil war, left the Afghan government, military, police force, governing bodies, and laws completely decimated. The radical right-wing militant groups that arose from the ashes of that conflict, and which were backed by terrorist-sponsoring states, to this day continue to destabilize the country, kill innocent people, and violate human rights. In the case of Iraq, it has led to the creation of ISIS and a war with Syria, which resulted in the largest refugee crisis since Afghanistan. If Iran shares the same fate as other countries targeted by the United States, the carnage of that conflict would spill into all of its neighboring countries. Extremist militant groups in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan would be able to freely roam the entire region with no government or army to stop them. If you look at Iran's geographical location, it is key for this. This could result in either one of two ways. The first is that it could lead to a coalition between these militant groups, which would make them more dangerous for the people living in the region and the surrounding countries, or it could lead to a never-ending turf war between these militant groups in the region, which would result in an unprecedented number of civilian casualties and a refugee crisis which would dwarf even that of Afghanistan and Syria.